I thought booking a quiet cabin in the Rocky Mountains would be a peaceful getaway, but the welcome note wasn't a greeting. It was a list of rules. Rules that warned me never to open the door after midnight, never to use a flashlight, and to stay away from the mirrors. At first, I thought it was some creepy joke, but when I saw something in the woods wearing my own face, smiling back at me, I realized the rules weren't suggestions. They were the only reason I was still alive. But on the seventh night, the rules changed. And that's when I learned the horrifying truth. Welcome back to Dr. Snooze, the place where nightmares come alive. Tonight, I have a story that will make you think twice before booking your next trip. Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's step inside the cabin and see what really waits in the dark. When I first booked the cabin on Airbnb, I wasn't looking for anything extravagant. I needed peace, quiet, and a break from the suffocating noise of city life. The Rocky Mountains had always fascinated me. Vast stretches of wilderness, snow-dusted peaks, and air so crisp you could almost taste the purity. The listing caught my eye because of its rustic appeal. A hand-built wooden cabin, complete with a stone fireplace, tucked deep into the mountains. The photos showed a wraparound porch with rocking chairs, tall pines surrounding the property, and a clear night sky brimming with stars. The host, a man named Elias, had 5-star reviews that praised him for being responsive, but not intrusive. People said the cabin was clean, well kept, and perfect for a retreat. Still, one thing struck me as odd. Every review seemed to avoid mentioning the rules, even though the listing description had a long section dedicated to them. Most hosts included simple guidelines like no smoking, no pets, or keep noise to a minimum. Elias's rules, however, were strangely specific. I skimmed them before booking, brushing off their strangeness as part of the mountain lifestyle. They were written in bold, numbered carefully from 1 to 10. 1. Arrive before sunset, never after. 2. Lock the door 3 times before bed, not once, not twice, 3 times exactly. 3. If you hear footsteps on the porch at night, do not investigate. Do not look out the windows. 4. Keep the curtains closed after dark, always. 5. If you wake up to knocking, ignore it. It will stop. 6. Do not leave food scraps outside, ever. 7. If you must go outside after midnight, take the lantern by the fireplace. Not a flashlight. Never a flashlight. 8. Do not whistle in or around the cabin. 9. At dawn, you may hear voices in the trees. Do not respond. 10. Leave before the 7th day. The final rule stuck in my mind the most. Leave before the 7th day. What would happen if I didn't? Most reviews mentioned guests only stayed for a couple of nights, so maybe nobody had tested that limit. I shook off my unease, convincing myself that some mountain folk had odd superstitions, and maybe Elias wrote them down just to keep guests on their best behavior. The drive to the cabin was long and winding through narrow roads carved into the cliff sides. The higher I climbed, the thinner the air seemed, and the radio lost its signal until only static filled the speakers. My cell service had cut out hours earlier. By the time I reached the small gravel road leading to the cabin, the sun had dipped low, setting the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and violet. I checked the clock, 6:47 p.m. Sunset wasn't far away. The cabin came into view suddenly, like it had been hiding in the trees all along. Smoke curled from the stone chimney and the front porch light glowed faintly. For a brief moment, I thought someone else was already there, but when I parked and stepped out, the property was silent. No car, no sound, but the whispering wind through the pines. The key was in a lockbox by the door, just as Elias had described in his message. When I opened the door, the interior felt warmer than expected, as if the cabin had been waiting for me. The scent of pine wood filled the air, mixed with something faintly metallic, though I told myself it was probably just the fireplace. Inside, the decor was rustic but comfortable. Woven rugs, wooden furniture, and shelves lined with books that looked decades old. A mounted deer head stared down at me from above the mantel. I dropped my bags and stood for a moment, letting the silence of the mountains sink in. No honking cars, no neighbors shouting, no constant buzzing of my phone. Just silence, deep and heavy. On the small kitchen table lay a note written in neat handwriting on cream-colored paper. Welcome. Remember the rules. They are not suggestions. No signature, but it didn't need one. I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine as I read it. Something about the phrasing unsettled me, but I pushed the thought aside. It had been a long drive and my body ached for rest. I cooked a simple dinner, washed the dishes, and as night settled, I remembered rule number 4. Close the curtains after dark. I moved from window to window, drawing the heavy fabric closed until the cabin was shut off from the outside world. The forest beyond disappeared into darkness. The hours passed slowly, and around midnight I heard it, the sound of footsteps on the porch. They were slow, deliberate, like someone pacing just beyond the front door. My breath caught in my chest. Instinct urged me to peek through the curtain or check the peephole, but rule number 3 burned in my memory. Do not investigate. Do not look out the windows. I sat frozen in the chair by the fireplace, listening. The steps went from one side of the porch to the other, then paused, as though whoever or whatever it was stood right outside the door. A faint creak followed, as if weight leaned against the wooden boards. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps continued, circling the porch again, and then faded into the night. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the fire, until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The morning light was a relief, spilling through cracks in the curtains. I opened them cautiously, half expecting to see footprints in the dirt, but the porch was spotless. No sign anyone had been there. I convinced myself it must have been an animal, a bear, maybe, or a deer. But animals didn't pace back and forth like that. Animals didn't knock softly, which I could have sworn I'd heard once between the steps. I didn't want to think about it too much. Instead, I decided to explore the area. The mountain air was brisk, filled with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Trails wound through the forest, and I followed one down to a creek, where water rushed over smooth stones. For a while, I almost forgot about the rules, the footsteps, the strange feeling that had clung to me all night. When I returned in the afternoon, something was waiting on the porch. It was a lantern, the same one Elias mentioned in the rules. Heavy, brass, with a glass chamber and a small handle. I hadn't noticed it the night before, and I knew I hadn't brought it outside. A folded slip of paper lay beneath it. Use this if you must. Do not forget. The handwriting matched the note from the kitchen. My stomach turned uneasily as I picked it up. I didn't remember mentioning to Elias that I was nervous about the rules, or that I'd heard footsteps last night. How could he know? Unless he'd been here. Watching. That night, I followed every rule carefully. Curtains drawn, food scraps tied tightly in a bag and stored inside. I locked the door 3 times before bed, counting out loud to make sure. Still, the footsteps came. Louder this time, heavier, almost impatient. They circled the porch twice, then stopped. For several minutes, nothing happened. I thought maybe they had gone. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps on the door. I sat in bed, heart hammering, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The knock came again, louder this time. I buried my face in the pillow, repeating to myself, "Ignore it. It will stop." The knock turned into a rattle, as if something was testing the door handle. I thanked God I had locked it 3 times. Eventually, the sounds faded into silence, but just before I drifted into uneasy sleep, I heard something else, a whisper, soft as the wind, drifting through the cracks of the cabin. "Let me in." I woke up drenched in sweat, the memory of that whisper still clinging to me like a shadow. Morning light seeped through the curtains, soft and golden, but it brought no comfort. My mind replayed the sound over and over, that fragile voice asking to be let in. It hadn't been my imagination. I knew what I had heard. The first thing I did was check the front door. The locks were still in place, all 3 of them. The wood looked untouched. There were no footprints on the porch, no scratches, no sign that anyone had stood there during the night. But the unease gnawed at me. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring at the rules I had scribbled onto a piece of paper from memory. 10 rules, each more unsettling than the last. The footsteps, the knocking, the whisper, it all lined up too perfectly with the warnings. They weren't just some eccentric set of guidelines. They were survival instructions. The day stretched long and heavy. I tried distracting myself with a book from the shelf, but the words blurred together. I went outside for a walk, following the creek deeper into the forest, but the trees pressed close on all sides. their shadows twisting into strange shapes. I thought I saw movement more than once, but whenever I turned, nothing was there. When I got back, another note waited on the porch. This time it wasn't under the lantern. It was tucked neatly into the crack of the door. You followed the rules. Good. Keep doing so. No signature. No explanation. Just that same neat handwriting. I couldn't decide if it reassured me or terrified me more. Whoever left it knew what had happened last night. Either Elias was checking on me, or there was someone, or something, else making sure I stayed in line. That evening, I cooked dinner and kept my routine steady, almost ritualistic. Curtains closed before dark, food sealed away, the lantern placed by the fireplace where I could grab it if necessary. When the time came, I locked the door 3 times, the metallic clicks echoing in the silence. But despite my preparation, the dread settled in deeper than before. I sat by the fire, listening to the wood crackle, waiting. Midnight drew near, and my heart climbed into my throat. The footsteps came, as I knew they would. Heavy this time, almost stomping across the porch. They didn't circle like before. They stopped directly in front of the door. I froze, not daring to breathe. The knock followed. 3 hard raps that shook the door in its frame. Then silence. I told myself to stay calm, to follow the rule. Do not answer. Do not investigate. My chest tightened painfully as I counted the seconds. Then came the whisper again. Let me in. It was louder this time, almost urgent. A voice that sounded close, as if the speaker pressed their lips right against the door. I clenched my fists and stayed still. But the whisper didn't stop. It grew angrier, repeating the phrase over and over until it turned into a low growl. My body trembled, sweat beading on my forehead, and then abruptly, it stopped. The footsteps retreated, fading into the night. I thought it was over. I thought I'd survived another night. But then, from the far side of the cabin, I heard something else. A new sound. Knocking. On the window. I nearly cried out, but I caught myself, biting down on my hand to muffle the sound. The curtains were drawn, thank God, but I could see the faint outline of movement against the fabric. A shadow. A figure standing just outside, tapping gently. Let me in. The voice seeped through the wall, softer now, almost coaxing. It didn't come from the door anymore. It was right there, at the window by my bed. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to peek just once, but the rules hammered inside my head. Do not look out the windows. I turned my face toward the wall and prayed for morning. When the first gray light filtered through the cracks in the curtains, I dared to move again. My body felt like lead, my eyes raw from lack of sleep. I pulled the curtains aside just enough to peer outside. The ground was disturbed, the soil churned up, but there were no footprints. Not human ones, anyway. Just long, uneven marks, as though something with too many legs had dragged itself around the cabin. I didn't eat breakfast. I couldn't. My stomach was a knot of fear and nausea. By mid-morning, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here much longer. The rules said to leave before the 7th day, but I was only on my 2nd night and already unraveling. I considered packing up and driving back down the mountain. But something about that thought unsettled me too. What if leaving early broke the rules? I didn't know if the rules only applied inside the cabin or if they followed me wherever I went. For all I knew, leaving before I was supposed to would anger whatever force had written them in the first place. I was trapped. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. I thought about calling for help, but my phone still had no service. The landline on the kitchen wall was dead too. When I picked it up, there was nothing but silence. Late that afternoon, I heard voices outside. At first I thought hikers had wandered close to the cabin, but when I listened more carefully, the hair on the back of my neck rose. The voices didn't sound natural. They were too many, layered on top of each other, speaking in hushed tones that blended with the rustling of the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound was wrong, like an echo played backward. Rule number 9 burned in my mind. At dawn, you may hear voices in the trees. Do not respond, but this wasn't dawn. It was late afternoon. Did that matter? Were the rules shifting? I stayed inside, crouched low by the fire, listening. The voices circled the cabin, weaving in and out of the trees. Every so often they stopped, and I felt them listening, waiting for me to answer. My throat was so dry I nearly coughed, but I held it in, praying they would leave. When the sun dipped and the forest grew dark, The voices finally faded. Silence returned, but it felt heavier, as if it were waiting for the night to fall. That night, I kept the lantern close. Midnight came, and with it, the knocking. First at the door, then at the windows, then on the walls themselves. Soft at first, then louder, until it sounded like dozens of hands pounding all around the cabin. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the lantern with trembling hands. My heart hammered in my chest as the whispers returned, overlapping this time, a chorus of voices all chanting the same words. Let me in, let me in, let me in. The sound rose higher and higher until it was nearly deafening. I couldn't take it anymore. I held the lantern close and squeezed my eyes shut. Suddenly, all at once, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. My ears rang with it. My skin crawled. Then from the fireplace came a single sound, a voice, clear and cold. You cannot leave. The fire sputtered as though something had passed through it, and for a moment the room grew icy cold. I sat frozen until morning light seeped into the cracks again. This time, I didn't check the porch. I didn't want to see what they might have left behind. But I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't safe anymore. By the third morning, I was barely functioning. My eyes felt raw, my body heavy, and my mind clouded by exhaustion. I hadn't truly slept since I arrived, not with the footsteps, the knocking, the whispers. Each night had been worse than the last. Yet the thought of leaving terrified me even more. The rules had not lied so far. Everything written there had happened exactly as described, which meant the last one, leave before the seventh day, wasn't some casual suggestion. It was a deadline, one I could not risk ignoring. I told myself I would endure 4 more nights, and then I would get out of this cursed place. That resolve carried me until mid-morning, when I noticed something strange. On the kitchen table, where the first note had been waiting for me, lay a new piece of paper. I hadn't seen it before, and I knew I hadn't placed it there. This one read, "Do not trust the forest. It remembers you now." The words unsettled me more than anything so far. What did it mean, the forest remembers me? I glanced out the window, but the curtains were drawn tight, keeping the outside world shut away. Still, I imagined the trees pressing close, their dark trunks lined like sentinels, watching. I couldn't sit in the cabin all day. The walls pressed in on me, the silence buzzing in my ears. I needed to move, to breathe, to at least pretend I wasn't trapped. So I forced myself outside. The air was sharp, laced with pine, and the ground crunched beneath my boots. The forest seemed ordinary enough in daylight. Sunlight streamed through the branches, scattering in golden shafts. Birds chirped, and a squirrel darted across my path. For a little while, I almost convinced myself I was safe. But as I wandered deeper, a subtle wrongness crept in. The trees grew denser, the air thicker. Every so often I thought I saw movement just beyond my sight. Shadows flitting between trunks, gone when I turned. I followed the creek again, letting its steady rush calm me. I sat by the water listening, trying to forget the horrors of the night. That was when I heard it. My name, it came faintly, drifting from the trees. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again. A voice, low and familiar. Daniel, my blood froze. Nobody should know my name here. I hadn't told anyone besides Elias, and I'd never met him face to face. I stood slowly, heart pounding. The voice called again, closer this time. "Daniel, come here." It was my mother's voice, gentle, soothing, exactly as I remembered from childhood. She'd been dead for 5 years. I backed away, stumbling on the rocks. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, as though the forest itself resisted me. The voice grew sharper, more insistent. "Daniel, don't ignore me." I bolted, crashing through the underbrush, lungs burning. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. When I finally burst into the clearing where the cabin stood, the air felt lighter, as if I'd escaped something pressing down on me. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it 3 times, even though it was still daylight. My chest heaved, and I sank to the floor, shaking. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I avoided the windows. I avoided the forest. I sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames, waiting for night to come. When darkness fell, I followed the rules like scripture. Curtains drawn, door locked 3 times, food sealed away, the lantern at my side. I prayed the night would pass quietly, but of course it didn't. The footsteps returned, heavier than ever. They didn't pace this time. They stomped, rattling the boards. The knocking followed, loud and relentless, shaking the windows in their frames. Then came the whispers. Dozens of voices, all speaking at once, layered and distorted. Some were deep, some high-pitched, some eerily familiar. They all said the same thing. "Let me in." I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound seemed to seep through my skull, vibrating in my bones. The lantern flickered as though reacting to the voices. Suddenly, the fire in the hearth roared higher, flames twisting unnaturally. A shape flickered inside them, dark, formless, but watching me. "You will not last," it hissed. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern. My breath came fast, ragged. The whispers grew louder, the pounding harsher until I thought the cabin itself would splinter. Then, without warning, it all stopped. The silence rang louder than the noise. My ears buzzed with it. My chest ached from holding my breath. And then, slowly, a new sound came. Scratching. From the ceiling. I tilted my head back, dread flooding me. Something crawled across the roof, dragging claws against the wood. The sound circled, moving above me. Then it began to descend. I heard it scraping down the walls, inching closer to the windows. I clutched the lantern, light trembling with my hands. The scratching reached the glass, a screech that made my teeth ache. For a moment, I thought the window would shatter, but it didn't. It lingered there, waiting. I sat rigid, not daring to move until dawn finally crept in. The scratching faded, the whispers vanished. Morning had saved me again. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the rules wouldn't be enough. That day, I found another note on the table. "You are weakening. They can smell it. Do not falter." I stared at the paper, heart sinking. Whoever left these notes knew exactly what was happening. Maybe it was Elias, maybe it wasn't. Either way, I felt the truth pressing down on me. I was prey. The forest wasn't just watching me, it was hunting me, and I still had 4 nights left. The fourth morning came with no sense of relief. My body trembled from exhaustion, and my eyes stung from the lack of sleep. I felt as though the rules were the only thing tethering me to survival, but each night pushed me closer to breaking. The note from yesterday haunted me. "You are weakening. They can smell it." I didn't know who they were, but I could feel them. In the silence of the cabin, in the weight of the forest, I sensed something watching me from every shadow. I tried to keep busy during the day, convincing myself that routine would hold me together. I cooked, I swept the floor, I even stacked wood outside by the shed. The mountain air was crisp and thin, the kind of air that should have cleared my head, but instead it filled me with dread, because I wasn't alone out there. I didn't see them, not directly, but I heard them. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, the sound of something large moving between the trees. Sometimes a faint whisper drifted on the breeze, just out of reach. Once, I swore I heard my own voice echo back at me, repeating words I hadn't spoken aloud. By the time I retreated into the cabin, my nerves were frayed. I locked the door 3 times even before dusk, pacing the floor like a prisoner in his own cell. The cabin had begun to change too. The books on the shelves weren't where I remembered leaving them. The deer head above the fireplace seemed to shift its gaze whenever I looked away. The clock on the wall ticked out of rhythm, its hands jerking forward at odd intervals. When night came, I followed the rules as carefully as ever. Curtains drawn tight, lantern closed, door locked, food sealed. I sat by the fire, staring at the flames until my vision blurred, and then the knocking began. It was softer this time, almost polite, but it came from every wall at once. The whispers followed, but they weren't pleading anymore. They were laughing. A low, mocking sound that wormed into my chest and made my skin crawl. "Daniel," one of them called. The voice was eerily familiar, my own. "Daniel, open up. We're waiting." I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound seeped through, as though it came from inside me. The fire flickered wildly, throwing long shadows across the room. The lantern hissed faintly, its light trembling. The laughter grew louder, overlapping until it became a chorus. They mocked my fear, my obedience, my silence. Then the scratching returned, this time from beneath the floorboards. I froze, listening as something crawled under the cabin, dragging claws along the wood. It circled below me, slow and deliberate. The boards groaned as though under weight. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. I gripped the lantern, whispering to myself that morning would come, that I only had to last until the sun rose. But then the voice came again from the fireplace. "You won't see the 7th day." The flames surged, twisting into the shape of a face, hollow eyes, jagged mouth leering at me from the fire. My body locked in terror. The air grew stifling, thick with smoke that wasn't there. I stumbled backward, clutching the lantern so tightly my knuckles ached. The whispers all around me rose to a deafening pitch. "Let us in! Let us in! Let us in!" The cabin shook as though gripped by unseen hands. Dishes rattled in the cupboards, books toppled from shelves. The deer head above the fireplace crashed to the floor with a thunderous crack. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the door, fumbling with the locks. My mind screamed that leaving was against the rules, that I would only make it worse, but I didn't care. I needed air. I needed space. The moment I unlocked the third bolt, the whispers stopped. The silence was instant, suffocating. My ears rang in its wake. I stood there, hand frozen on the knob, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then slowly something knocked, once, from inside the cabin. The sound came from the bedroom door behind me. A hollow, deliberate knock. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end. I turned my head, heart thundering in my chest. The door to the bedroom was closed. I hadn't closed it. I hadn't even gone in there all day. Another knock. Louder. I backed away, clutching the lantern, eyes locked on the door. The wood shuddered with a third knock, so forceful it rattled the frame. "Daniel," a voice crooned from the other side. "We're already in." I dropped the lantern. The glass cracked, but the flame inside sputtered and held. Shadows leapt across the walls as I scrambled to pick it up. When I looked back, the bedroom door was ajar. Darkness spilled from the gap like smoke, thick and unnatural. The air grew colder, sharp enough to sting my lungs. A shape moved in the blackness, tall and thin, its outline twitching unnaturally. I couldn't see its face, only the suggestion of limbs too long, fingers scraping the doorframe as it shifted forward. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the rug. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. The thing leaned into the light of the lantern, and for the first time I saw its face. It was mine. Twisted, hollow, eyes black as void, mouth stretched into a grin too wide for human skin. It whispered with my own voice, "You cannot leave." I fell back against the wall, clutching the lantern like a shield. The creature tilted its head, watching me with amusement. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it retreated into the darkness, and the bedroom door slammed shut. The cabin was silent again, but the silence carried weight, as if the walls themselves held their breath. I didn't move until the first light of dawn crept across the floorboards. Only then did I dare to approach the bedroom. The door stood open, the room was empty. On the bed lay another note. 3 nights remain. You belong to us now. I didn't leave the cabin the entire 5th day. The forest pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't shake the memory of that thing wearing my face, grinning at me from the doorway. No amount of sunlight could bleach that image from my mind. The note it had left. 3 nights remain. You belong to us now. Sat on the table, weighted down with the lantern so it wouldn't drift away. I wanted to burn it, to destroy it, but something told me it would only come back. And worse, maybe it would anger them. I moved through the cabin in silence, avoiding my reflection in the windows and mirrors. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing that twisted version of myself staring back. I ate little, just enough to keep my strength. My hands shook as I raised food to my mouth, but hunger was nothing compared to fear. The hours dragged, every tick of the crooked clock hammering into my skull. I jumped at every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of wind against the walls. At one point, I swore I heard faint scratching from inside the walls themselves, as if something moved between them, waiting. By late afternoon, I heard the voices again, drifting through the trees. This time they weren't hushed. They were loud, clear, chanting in some language I couldn't understand. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still feel the vibrations in my chest. When darkness fell, I followed the rules as if my life depended on it. Curtains closed, door locked 3 times, food sealed, lantern lit. But even as I moved through the motions, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The footsteps started almost immediately, heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin over and over. The knocking followed, not in one place but everywhere, walls, windows, roof. The sound surrounded me, closing in from all sides. I gripped the lantern, holding it close. The flame flickered violently, as though it too feared what prowled outside. Then the whispers began again, louder than ever. Not pleading, not mocking this time, commanding. Let us in. The words boomed through the cabin, rattling the dishes, shaking dust from the rafters. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The voices were inside my skull, vibrating in my teeth, my bones. I staggered back against the wall, gasping for air. The lantern slipped from my trembling hands, clattering onto the rug. I lunged to catch it before it toppled completely. The thought of being left in the dark sent pure panic through me. And then the fire went out. One moment it roared in the hearth, the next it was gone, snuffed out like a candle. The cabin plunged into shadow, the lantern's weak glow the only light left. The whispers stopped. The silence was thick, unnatural. I didn't move, didn't breathe, waiting for the next sound. It came from the bedroom. The door creaked open on its own, slowly, painfully, the hinges groaning. Darkness spilled from the gap, thick and alive, creeping across the floor like smoke. Something moved within it. I saw the shape again, too tall, too thin, limbs bending wrong. But this time, it wasn't alone. More shapes pressed forward, their outlines twitching and shifting, their movements jerky and inhuman. My lantern flickered. The first figure stepped into the light, and once again I saw my own face. But the others, the others wore faces too. Faces I recognized, my mother, my father, friends I hadn't seen in years, people I knew were dead. Each face was stretched and hollow, eyes black, mouths twisted into that same impossible grin. They spoke in unison, voices layering together into a sound that shook the cabin. You belong to us. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the wall, clutching the lantern as though it could save me. My breath came in ragged gasps. The figures advanced, their long fingers scraping the floorboards, leaving deep gouges in the wood. The lantern flickered again, dimming, as though it couldn't stand against their presence. In a moment of blind desperation, I remembered Rule 7. If you must go outside after midnight, take the lantern by the fireplace. Not a flashlight. Never a flashlight. I didn't know if it would help, but I had no other choice. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the locks. 1, 2, 3. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the lantern again. Behind me, the figure shrieked, a sound so loud it pierced my skull. I wrenched the door open and stumbled onto the porch. Cold mountain air hit me like a slap, but I kept running, the lantern swinging wildly in my grip. The forest loomed ahead, dark and endless, but it was better than the cabin. The whispers followed me into the trees, echoing from every direction. Faces flickered in the shadows, grinning at me from between the trunks. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, roots twisting to trip me, branches clawing at my arms. But the lantern held. Its glow cut a narrow path through the darkness, keeping the figures just beyond its reach. Every time they surged forward, the light flared, forcing them back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed by the creek, clutching the lantern to my chest. The whispers circled me, furious, but they couldn't cross the light. For hours I sat there, trembling, waiting for the sun. When dawn finally broke, the shadows melted away. The forest fell silent. I staggered back to the cabin, half dead with exhaustion. The door still hung open, the interior dark and ruined. The deer head lay shattered on the floor, the books scattered, the walls gouged with claw marks. On the table lay another note. 2 nights remain. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You are ours. I sank into the chair, staring at the words, the lantern flickering weakly beside me. For the first time since I arrived, I felt sure of something. I wasn't going to make it to the 7th day. The 6th morning bled into existence with pale light, but it offered no warmth, no comfort. I sat at the cabin table, the newest note clutched in my hands, its words burned into my skull. 2 nights remain. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You are ours. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, my face, my family's faces, grinning from the dark. The lantern's flame sputtered weakly beside me, nearly spent. I prayed daylight would mean safety, but even in the morning, I felt them pressing in, watching from the tree line. I thought about leaving again, about following the creek down the mountain, but the idea twisted my stomach. Last night proved it. There was no leaving. The rules were chains, and the cabin was a cage. By noon, I noticed something new. Scratches appeared on the inside of the cabin walls. They hadn't been there that morning. Jagged claw marks, gouged deep, forming crude words that stretched across the wood. 1 night remains. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the note slipping from my hand. My breath caught in my throat as I traced the words with shaking fingers. They weren't threats anymore. They were promises. I spent the day in silence, too scared to move, too scared to breathe too loudly. Every sound outside felt deliberate, every gust of wind like a whisper meant for me. I kept glancing at the fireplace, wondering if the lantern would last the night. When the sun dipped behind the peaks, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and red, I knew I was approaching the final night, the seventh, the rule that had been left deliberately vague. On the seventh day, follow the instructions exactly. If you fail, you won't survive the night. But there were no instructions for the seventh day. That was the trick. Darkness fell hard, faster than any night before. The lantern flickered, weaker now, as though drained by their presence. I lit the fireplace with trembling hands, feeding it with every scrap of wood I had left. The cabin groaned, shuddered as if alive. The walls bulged inward, the ceiling sagged. Whispers rose outside, not one voice but thousands, chanting, screaming, laughing. They pressed against the windows, the doors, the roof, and then silence. The quiet was worse than the noise. It was heavy, absolute, the kind of silence that feels like being buried alive. A knock broke it. 3 slow raps on the door. I froze, staring at the wood, my blood running cold. The rules screamed in my head. Never open the door after midnight, no matter who you think you hear. But then a voice called, "Please, it's me, let me in." It was my mother's voice. Every instinct told me it wasn't her. She'd been dead for years. But hearing her voice broke something in me. I pressed my hands against my ears, rocking back and forth, whispering, "Not real, not real, not real." Another knock, harder this time. "Please, I'm cold, let me in." I squeezed my eyes shut, but tears leaked out anyway. My throat tightened, the voice cracked, desperate. "Why won't you let me in? Don't you love me?" I screamed, hurling the lantern at the door. It shattered, spilling fire across the floor. The flames caught instantly, racing up the wood. The heat blasted my face, smoke filling my lungs. The voices outside howled in unison, furious, inhuman. The cabin shook violently, timbers snapping, walls splintering. Through the fire and smoke, I saw faces pressed against the windows, mouths open wide, teeth jagged and endless. The roof caved first, then the walls. Fire consumed everything. I stumbled out into the night, coughing, choking, flames licking my clothes. The forest loomed around me, shadows writhing between the trees. Figures stepped out, dozens of them, their limbs bending wrong, their faces masks of everyone I'd ever loved. They circled me, chanting in that guttural language, their voices shaking the ground. The heat from the burning cabin painted them in flickering light, their grins impossibly wide. Then one stepped forward, the one that wore my face. It leaned close, eyes black voids, teeth endless. Its breath was ice, cutting through the fire's heat. On the seventh day, it whispered, "You become one of us." The others surged forward, their hands clawing, pulling, tearing. My scream was swallowed by the night, by the fire, by their voices chanting in triumph. And then, nothing. No pain, no sound, just darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the trees. The fire still roared, the cabin collapsing into ash, but I wasn't in my body anymore. I looked down at my hands. They were too long, too thin, the fingers sharp as knives. My reflection shone faintly in the creek nearby, and I saw what I had become, hollow-eyed, grinning, wearing my own twisted face. The others surrounded me, their smiles wide, their voices rising in a chorus that rattled the mountains. I joined them. Now when strangers book the cabin in the Rockies, I'll be there too, watching, waiting, whispering through the walls. The rules are never meant to be followed. They're meant to prepare you for the end. And that was the terrifying truth behind the Airbnb in the Rocky Mountains. A place where the rules weren't meant to keep you safe, but to prepare you for something far worse. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Dr. Snooze for more stories that will keep you awake long after the lights go out. And remember, there are always more rules waiting to be broken. I'll see you in the next nightmare.